empty. He tried to make himself believe it, but the wanton destruction at the house, the senselessness of it, left little room for belief of that sort. Believing they would give up short of killing everyone and everything they could find was dangerous, a foolish chance he could not afford to take. Trollocs. Light above, Trollocs. Creatures out of the Gleeman's Tale coming out of the night to bash in the door. And a fade. Light shine on me, a fade. Abruptly, he realized he was holding the untied ends of the bandage in motionless hands. Frozen like a rabbit that's seen a hawk's shadow, he thought scornfully. With an angry shake of his head, he finished tying the bandage around Tam's chest. Knowing what he had to do, even getting on with it, did not stop him being afraid. When the Trollocs came back, they would surely begin searching the forest around the farm for some trace of the people who had escaped them. The body of the one he had killed would tell them those people were not far off. Who knew what a fade would do, or could do? On top of that, his father's comment about Trollocs' hearing was as loud in his mind as if Tam had just said it. He found himself resisting the urge to put a hand over Tam's mouth to still his groans and murmurs. Some track by scent. What can I do about that? Nothing. He could not waste time worrying over problems he could do nothing about. You have to keep quiet, he whispered in his father's ear. The Trollocs will be back. Tam spoke in hushed, forced tones. You're still lovely, Kari. Still lovely as a girl. Rand grimaced.
That's it.
His mother had been dead 15 years. If Tam
Alan
believed she was still alive, then the fever was even worse than Rand had thought. How could he be kept from speaking, now that silence might mean life? Mother wants you to be quiet, Rand whispered.
We'll stop in when we get there.
He paused to clear his throat of a sudden tightness.
No.
She had had gentle
We're at
hands.
sea now, and
He remembered that much.
no one's there but my dad.
Kari wants you to be quiet.
Hope.
Here,
You
drink.
need to let him know what happened.
Tam gulped thirstily from the water skin, but after a few swallows, he turned his head aside and began murmuring softly again, too low for Rand to understand. He hoped it was too low to be heard by hunting Trollocs, too. Hastily, he got on with what was needed. 3 of the blankets he wove around and between the shafts cut from the cart, contriving a makeshift litter. He would only be able to carry one end, letting the other drag on the ground, but it would have to do. From the last blanket, he cut a long strip with his belt knife, then tied one end of the strip to each of the shafts.
Okay, time to hunt some
As gently as he could, he lifted Tam onto the litter,
that?
wincing with
Don't
every
get all
moan.
hot and bothered.
His father had always seemed indestructible. Nothing could harm him, nothing could stop him, or even slow him down. For him to be in this condition almost robbed Rand of what courage he had managed to gather. But he had to keep on. That was all that kept him moving. He had to. When Tam finally lay on the litter, Rand hesitated, then took the sword belt from his father's waist. When he fastened it around himself, it felt odd there. It made him feel odd. Belt and sheath and sword together only weighed a few pounds, but when he sheathed the blade, it seemed to drag at him like a great weight. Angrily, he berated himself. This was no time or place for foolish fantasies. It was only a big knife. How many times had he daydreamed about wearing his sword and having adventures? If he could kill one Trolloc with it, he could surely fight off many others as well. Only he knew all too well what had happened in the farmhouse had been the purest luck. His daydream adventures had never included his teeth chattering, or running for his life through the night, or his father at the point of death. Hastily, he tucked the last blanket around Tam, laid the water skin and the rest of the cloth beside his father on the litter. With a deep breath, he held between the shafts and lifted the strip of blanket over his head, settled across his shoulders and under his arms. When he gripped the shafts and straightened, most of the weight was on his shoulders. It did not seem like very much.
Jump!
Trying to keep a smooth pace, he set out for Emmons Field, the litter scraping along behind him.
Snow!
He had already decided to make his way to the quarry road and follow that to the village. The danger would almost certainly be greater along the road, but Tam would receive no help at all if he got them lost trying to find his way through the woods in the dark. In the darkness, he was almost out on the quarry road before he knew it. When he realized where he was, his throat tightened like a fist. Hurriedly, he turned the litter around and dragged it back to the tree's way, then stopped to catch his breath and let his heart stop pounding. Still panting, he turned east toward Emmons Field. Traveling through the trees was more difficult than taking Tam down the road, and the night surely did not help. But going out onto the road itself would be madness. The idea was to reach the village without meeting any Trollocs, without even seeing any if he had his wish. He had to assume the Trollocs were still hunting them, and sooner or later they would realize the two had set off for the village. That was the most likely place to go, and the quarry road the most likely route. In truth, he found himself closer to the road than he
I went
liked.
to the Foul Sea.
The night and
hoping
the
to
shadows
help
under the
her.
trees seemed awfully bare cover in which
But
to
I
hide
was
from the
too
eyes of
late.
anyone traveling along it. Moonlight filtering through bare branches gave only enough illumination to fool his eyes into thinking they saw what was underfoot.
Ow!
Roots threatened to
knew
trip
you
him
were
at every
hard-headed.
step.
That was
Old brambles snagged his
Snap
legs.
to it. We're
And sudden
rolling
dips
out.
or rises in the ground had him half falling as his foot
Hunting the
met nothing
sea,
but air where he expected firm earth, or stumbling when his toe struck dirt while still moving forward. Tam's mutterings broke into a sharp groan whenever one of the shafts bumped too quickly over a root or rock. Uncertainty made him peer into the darkness
I
until
will
his
keep
eyes
my
burned,
promise, Lightning.
listened as he had never listened before. Every scrape of branch against branch, every rustle of pine needles, brought him to a halt, ears straining, hardly daring to breathe for fear he might not hear some warning sound, for fear he might hear that sound. Only when he was sure it was just the wind would he go on. Slowly weariness crept into his arms and legs, driven home by a night wind that mocked his cloak and coat. The weight of the litter, so little at the start, now tried to pull him to the ground. His stumbles were no longer all from tripping. The almost constant struggle not to fall took as much out of him as did the actual work of pulling the litter. He had been up before dawn to begin his chores, and even with the trip to Emmons Field, he had done almost a full day's work. On any normal night, he would be resting before the fireplace, reading one of Tam's small collection of books before going to bed. The sharp chill soaked into his bones, and his stomach reminded him that he had had nothing to eat since Mr. Salvier's honey cakes. He muttered to himself, angry at not taking some food at the farm. A few minutes more could not have made any difference. A few minutes to find some bread and cheese. The Trollocs would not have come back in just a few minutes more. Or just the bread. Of course, Mr. Salvier would insist on putting a hot meal in front of him once they reached the inn. A steaming plate of her thick lamb stew, probably. And some of that bread she had been baking. And lots of hot tea. They came over the Dragon Wall like a flood, Tam said suddenly in a strong, angry voice, and washed the land with blood. How many died for Lemon's sin? Rand almost fell from surprise. Wearily, he lowered the litter to the ground and untangled himself. The strip of blanket left a burning groove in his shoulders. Struggling to work the knots out, he knelt beside Tam. Fumbling for the water bag, he peered through the trees, trying vainly in the dim moonlight to see up and down the road, not 20 paces away. Nothing moved there but shadows. Nothing but shadows. There isn't any flood of Trollocs, Father. Not now, anyway. We'll be safe in Emmons Field soon. Drink a little water. Tam brushed aside the water bag with an arm that seemed to have regained all of its strength. He seized Rand's collar, pulling him close enough to feel the heat of his father's fever in his own cheek. They called them savages, Tam said urgently. The fools said they could be swept aside like rubbish. How many battles lost, how many cities burned before they faced the truth, before the nations stood together against them? He loosed his hold on Rand, and sadness filled his voice. The field of Mara, carpeted with the dead, and no sound but the cries of ravens and the buzzing of flies. The topless towers of Cairene, burning in the night like torches. All the way to the shining walls they burned and slew before they were turned back. All the way to... Rand clamped a hand over his father's mouth. The sound came again, a rhythmic thudding, directionless in the trees, fading, then growing stronger again as the wind shifted. Frowning, he turned his head slowly, trying to decide from where it came. A flicker of motion caught the corner of his eye, and in an instant he was crouched over Tam. He was startled to feel the hilt of the sword clutched tight in his hand, but most of him concentrated on the quarry road, as if the road were the only real thing in the entire world.
You want to get the Nautilus?
Wavering shadows to the east slowly resolved themselves into a horse and rider, followed up the road by tall, bulky shapes trotting to keep up with the animal. The pale light of the moon glittered from spearheads and axe blades. Rand never even considered that they might be villagers coming to
There's
help.
a sight I didn't want to
He
see.
knew what they were. He could feel it, like grit scraping his bones, even before they drew close enough for moonlight to reveal the hooded cloak,
No
swathing the
daydreaming
horses.
now.
A cloak that hung undisturbed by the wind. All of the shapes appeared black in the night, and the horses' hooves made the same sounds that any others would. Rand knew this horse from the other. Behind the Dark Rider came nightmare forms with horns and muzzles and beaks. Trollocs in a double file, all in steps, boots and hooves striking the ground at the same instant as if obeying a single mind. Rand counted 20 as they ran past. He wondered what kind of man would dare turn his back on so many Trollocs. Or on one, for that matter. The trotting column disappeared westward. thumping footfalls fading into the darkness. But Rand remained where he was, not moving a muscle except to breathe. Something told him to be certain, absolutely certain. They were gone before he moved. At long last, he drew a deep breath and began to straighten. This time the horse made no sound at all. In eerie silence, the Dark Rider returned, his shadowy mount stopping every few steps as it walked slowly back down the road. The wind got higher and trees. The horseman's cloak lay still as death. Whenever the horse halted, that hooded head swung from side to side as the rider peered into the forest, searching. Exactly opposite Rand, the horse stopped again, the shattered opening of the hood turning toward where he crouched above his father. Rand's hand tightened convulsively on the sword hilt. He felt the gaze, just as he had that morning, and shivered again from the hatred, even if he could not see it. That shrouded man hated everyone and everything. Everything that lived. Despite the cold wind, sweat beaded on Rand's face. Then the horse was moving on, a few soundless steps, and stopped, until all Rand could see was a barely distinguishable blur in the night far down the road. It could have been anything, but he had not taken his eyes off it for a second. If he lost it, he was afraid the next time he saw the black-cloaked rider might be when that silent horse was on top of him. Abruptly, the shadow had led him back, passing in a silent gallop. The rider looked only ahead of him as he sped westward into the night, toward the mountain mist.
Atta girl!
Rand sagged, gulping air and scrubbing cold sweat off his face with his sleeve. He did not care anymore about why the Trollocs had come. If he never found out why, that would be fine. Just as long as it was all ended. With a shake, he gathered himself, hastily checking his father. Tam was still murmuring, but so softly, Rand could not make out the words. He tried to give him a drink, but the water spilled over his father's chin. Tam coughed and choked on the trickle that made it into his mouth, then began muttering again, as if there had not been any interruption. Rand splashed a little more water on the cloth on Tam's forehead, pushed the water bag back on the litter, and scrambled between the shafts again. He started out as if he had had a good night's sleep, but the new strength did not last long. Fear masked his tiredness in the beginning, but though the fear remained, the mask melted away quickly. Soon he was back to stumbling forward, trying to ignore hunger and aching muscles. He concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other without tripping. In his mind, he pictured Emmons Field, shutters thrown back and the houses lit for winter night. People shouting greetings as they passed back and forth on their visits. Fiddles filling the streets with Jane's Folly and Karen on the Wing. Harald would have one too many brandies and start singing The Wind and the Barley in a voice like a bullfrog. He always did, until his wife managed to shush him. And then Bowie would decide to prove he could still dance as well as ever. Matt would have something planned that would not quite happen the way he intended, and everybody would know he was responsible, even if no one could prove it. He could almost smile thinking about how it would be. After a time, Cam spoke up again.
Where's the weed killer when you need it?
It said it makes no seed, but they brought a cutting to Kyrene, a sapling. A royal gift of wonder for the king. Though he sounded angry, he was barely loud enough for Rand to understand. Anyone who could hear him would be able to hear the litter scraping across the ground, too.
For all we know, they
Rand kept on, only half listening. They never make peace. Never. They brought a sapling as a sign of peace. 500 years of peace. 500 years of peace for those who make no peace with strangers. Why did he put it down? Why? Blood was the price for Avendor Aldera. Blood the price for Lamin's pride. He faded off into muttering once more. Tiredly, Rand wondered what fever dream Tam could be having now. Avendesora? The Tree of Life was supposed to have all sorts of miraculous qualities, but none of the stories mentioned any sapling, or any they. There was only the one. That belonged to the Green Man. Only that morning he might have felt the dancing over the Green Man and the Tree of Life. They were only stories. Are they? Trollocs were just stories this morning. Maybe all the stories were as real as the news the peddlers and merchants brought. All the Gleeman's tales and all the stories told at night in front of the fireplace. Next he might actually meet the Green Man, or an old-eared giant, or a wild, black-veiled Aiel man. Sam was talking again, he realized, sometimes only murmuring, sometimes loud enough to understand. From time to time he stopped to pant for breath, then went down as if he thought he had been speaking the whole time. Battles are always hot. In the snow. Sweat heat. Blood heat. Only dust. Smoke the mountain. Had to get away from Stella. Fighting. Their women fight alongside the men sometimes. Why they had let her come, I don't... Gave birth there alone, before she died of her wounds. Covered the child with her cloak, but the wind blown the cloak away. Child blew with the cold. Should have been dead too, dying there, dying in the snow. I couldn't just leave a child. No children of our own. Always knew you wanted children. I knew you'd take it to your heart, Kari. Yes, lass. Rand is a good name. A good name. Suddenly, Rand's legs lost the little strength they had. Stumbling, he fell to his knees. Tam moaned with the jolt, and the strip of blanket cut into Rand's shoulders, but he was not aware of either. If a Trolloc had leaped up in front of him right then, he would have just stared at it. He looked over his shoulder at Tam, who had sunk back into wordless murmurs. Fever dreams, he thought dully. Fevers always brought bad dreams, and this was a night for nightmares, even without a fever. You are my father, he said aloud, stretching back a hand to touch Tam. And I am... The fever was worse, much worse. Grimly, he struggled to his feet. Tam murmured something, but Rand refused to listen to any more. Throwing his weight against the improvised harness, he tried to put all of his mind into taking one leaden step after another, into reaching the safety of Emmons Field. But he could not stop the echo in the back of his mind. He's my father. He's my father. It was just a fever dream. Light. Who am I? Chapter 7. Out of the woods.
Atta girl!
Gray first light came while Rand still trudged through the forest. At first, he did not really see. When he finally did, he stared at the fading darkness in surprise. No matter what his eyes told him, he could hardly believe he had spent all night trying to travel the distance from the farm to Emmons Field. Of course, the quarry road by day, rocks and all, was a far cry from the woods by night. On the other hand, it seemed days since he had seen the black-cloaked rider on the road, weeks since he and Tam had gone in for their supper. He no longer felt the strip of cloth between his shoulders, and he felt nothing in his shoulders except numbness, nor in his feet, for that matter. In between, it was another matter. His breath came in late in his hands that had long since set his throat and lungs to burning, and hunger twisted his stomach into queasy sickness. Rand was not sure how long it had been since the murmurs ceased, but he did not dare halt now to check on Tam. If he stopped, he would never be able to force himself to start out again. Anyway, whatever Tam's condition, he could do nothing beyond what he was doing. The only hope lay ahead in the village. He tried wearily to increase his pace, but his wooden legs continued their slow plod.
Here's the bumper crop.
He barely even noticed the cold or the wind. Vaguely, he caught the smell of wood smoke. At least he was almost there if he could smell the village chimneys. The tired smile had only begun on his face, though, when it turned to a frown. Smoke was heavy in the air. Too heavy. With the weather, a fire might well be blazing away on every hearth in the village, but the smoke was still too strong. In his mind, he saw again the Trollocs on the road. Trollocs coming from the east, from the direction of Emmons Field. He peered ahead, trying to make out the first houses, and ready to shout for help at the first sight of anyone, even send Bowie or one of the Coplans. A small voice in the back of his head told him to hope someone there could still give help. Suddenly a house became visible through the last bare branches of trees, and it was all he could do to keep his feet moving. Hope, turning to sharp despair, staggered into the village. Charred piles of rubble stood in the places of half the houses of Emmons Field. Soot-coated brick chimneys looked like dirty fingers from heaps of blackened timbers. Then wisps of smoke still rose from the ruins. Grimy-faced villagers, some yet in their nightclothes, spoke through the ashes, here pulling free a cookpot, or simply spotting forlornly at the wreckage of a stick. What little had been rescued from the flames dotted the streets. Tall mirrors, polished sideboards, high chests, stood in the dust among chairs and tables, buried under bedding, cooking utensils, meager piles of clothing and personal belongings. The destruction seemed scattered at random through the village. 5 houses marched untouched in one row, while in another place, a lone survivor stood surrounded by desolation. On the far side of the wine spring water, The 3 huge Beltane bonfires roared, tended by a cluster of men. Thick columns of black smoke bent northward with the wind, flecked by careless sparks. One of Master Alvir's Duran stallions was dragging something Rand could not make out over the ground toward the wagon bridge and the flames. Before he was well out of the trees, a sooty-faced Harald Luhan hurried to him, clutching a woodsman's axe in one thick-fingered hand. The burly blacksmith's ash-smeared nightshirt hung to his boots. The angry red welt of a burn across his chest going through a ragged tear. He dropped to one knee beside the litter. Tam's eyes were closed and his breathing came low and hard. "Frolics, boy?" Master Luhan asked in a smoke-hoarse voice. "Here too. Here too. Well, we may have been luckier than anyone has a right to be, if you can credit it. He needs the wisdom.
No daydreaming now.
Now, where in the light is she? Egwene!"
Way to go, Zaz!
Bed sheets torn into bandages, looked around at them without slowing. Her eyes stared at something in the far distance. Dark circles made them appear even larger than they actually were. Then she saw Rand and stopped, drawing a shuddering breath.
Now you're talking!
Not your father. Is he?
Take that!
Come, I'll take you to Nynaeve.
Bye-bye!
Rand was too tired, too stunned to speak. All through the night, Emond's Field had been a haven where he and Tam would be safe. Now all he could seem to do was stare in dismay at her smoke-stained dress. He noticed odd details as if they were very important. The buttons down the back of her dress were done up crookedly, and her hands were clean. He wondered why her hands were clean when smudges of soot marked her cheeks. Master Luhan seemed to understand what had come over him. Laying his axe across the shafts, the blacksmith picked up the rear of the litter and gave it a gentle push, prodding him to follow Egwene.
There should be a dock on the other side.
He stumbled after her as if walking in his sleep. Briefly, he wondered how Master Luhan knew the creatures were Trollocs, but it was a fleeting thought. If Tam could recognize them, there was no reason why Harald Luhan could not. "All the stories are real," he muttered. "So it seems, lad," the blacksmith said. "So it seems." Rand only half heard. He was concentrating on following Egwene's slender shape. He had pulled himself together just enough to wish she would hurry, though in truth, she was keeping her pace to what the 2 men could manage with their burden. She led them halfway down the green to the Calder house. Char blackened the edges of its thatch, and smut stained the whitewashed walls. Of the houses on either side, only the foundation stones were left, and 2 piles of ash and burned timbers. One had been the house of Baron Thane, one of the Miller's brothers. The other had been Abel Coffin's, Matt's father.
Look at that view.
Even the chimneys had toppled. "Wait here," Egwene said, and gave them a look as if expecting an answer. When they only stood there, she muttered something under her breath, then dashed inside. "Matt?" Rand said. "Is he?" "He's alive," the blacksmith said. He set down his end of the litter and straightened slowly. "I saw him only a little while ago. It's a wonder any of us are alive. The way they came after my house in the forge, you'd have thought I had gold and jewels in there. Elsbeth cracked one's skull with a frying pan. She took one look at the ashes of our house this morning and set out hunting around the village with the biggest hammer she could dig out of what's left of the forge, just in case any of them did instead of running away. I could almost pity the thing if she finds one." Now, the Calder house. Mistress Calder and a few others took in some of those who were hurt. The ones with no home of their own still standing. When the Wisdom's seen Tam, we'll find them again. The inn, maybe. The mayor offered it already. But Nynaeve said the hurt folk would feel better if there weren't so many of them together. Rand sank to his knees. Shrugging out of his blanket harness, he wearily busied himself with checking Tam's coverage.
Follow my lead!
Tam never moved or made a sound, even when Rand's wooden hands jostled him. When he was still breathing, he said, "My father." The other was just the fever talking. "What if they come back?" he said softly. "The wheel weaves as the wheel wills," Master Luhan said uneasily. "If they come back, well, they're gone now. So we pick up the pieces, build up what's been torn down." He sighed, his face clasped his knuckles the small of his back. For the first time, Rand realized that the heavy-set man was as tired as he was himself, if not more so. The blacksmith looked at the village, shaking his head. "I don't suppose today will be much of a bell time, but we'll make it through. We always have." Abruptly, he took up his axe, and his face firmed. There's work waiting for me. Don't you worry, man. The wisdom will take good care of him, and the light will take care of us all. And if the light does anything, well, we'll just take care of ourselves. Remember, we're Two Rivers folk. Still on his knees, Rand looked at the village as the blacksmith walked away. Really looked for the first time. Master Luhan was right, he thought, and was surprised that he was not surprised by what he saw. People still dug in the ruins of their homes, but even in the short time he had been there, more of them had begun to move.
Change is good, Pops.
He could almost feel the growing determination. Fox wondered. They had seen Fox. Had they seen the black-cloaked rider? Had they felt the taste? Nynaeve and Egwene appeared from the Calder house, and he sprang to his feet. Or rather, he tried to spring to his feet. It was more of a stumbling lurch that almost put him on his face in the dust. The wisdom dropped to her knees beside the litter without giving him so much as a glance. Her face and dress were even dirtier than Egwene's, and the same dark circles lined her eyes, though her hands, too, were clean. She felt Tam's face and thumbed open his eyelids. With a frown, she pulled down the coverings and eased the bandage aside to look at the wound. Before Rand could see what lay underneath, she had replaced the wadded cloth. Sighing, she smoothed the blanket and cloak back up to Tam's neck with a gentle touch, as if tucking a child in for the night. "There's nothing I can do," she said. She had to put her hands on her knees to straighten up. "I'm sorry, Rand." For a moment he stood, not understanding, as she started back to the house. Then he scrambled after her and pulled her around to face him. "He's dying," he cried. "I know,"
Change is good,
he said
Pops.
simply, and he sagged with the matter-of-factness of it. "You have to do something. You have to. You're the wisdom." Pain twisted her face, but only for an instant. Then she was all hollow-eyed resolve again, her voice emotionless and firm. "Yes, I am. I know what I can do with my medicine, and I know when it's too late. Don't you think I would do something if I could? But I can't. I can't, Rand. And there are others who need me. People I can help." "I brought it to you as quickly as I could," he mumbled. Even with the village in ruins, there had been the wisdom for hope. With that gone, it was empty. "I know you did," she said gently. She touched his cheek with her hand. "It isn't your fault. You did the best anyone could. I am sorry, Rand, but I have others to tend to. Our troubles are just beginning, I'm afraid." Vacantly, he stared after her until the door of the house closed behind her. He could not make any thought come, except that she would not help. Suddenly, he was knocked back a step as Egwene cannoned into him, throwing her arms around him. Her hug was hard enough to bring a grunt from him any other time. Now he only looked silently at the door behind
Change
him
is
and
good,
steps
Pops.
advanced. "I'm so sorry, Rand," he said against his chest. "I wish there was something I could do." Numbly, he put his arms around her. "I know. I have to do something, Egwene. I don't know what, but I can't just let him..." His voice broke, and she hugged him harder. "Egwene!" At Nynaeve's shout from the house, Egwene jumped. "Egwene, I need you!
Follow my
I want
lead,
your hands
Pops.
again!" She set herself free from Rand's arms.
Keep up, old man.
"What's up, Rand?" "Egwene!" He thought he heard a sob as she spun away from him. Then she was gone, and he was left alone beside the litter. For a moment he looked down at Tam, feeling nothing but hollow helplessness. Suddenly his face hardened. "The mayor will know what to do," he said, lifting the shafts once more. "The mayor will know." Bran Alzir always knew. With weary obstinacy, he set out for the Wine Spring Inn. Another of the Jiren stallions passed him, harness straps tied around the ankles of
Follow
a
my
big
lead,
pig,
Pop.
draped with a dirty blanket. Arms covered with coarse hair dragged in the dirt behind the blanket, and one corner was pushed up to reveal a ghost hand. The Two Rivers was no place for stories to become horribly real. If Trollocs belonged anywhere, it was in the world outside, for places where they had Aes Sedai and false dragons, and the light alone knew what else come to life out of the tales of Gleeman. Not the Two Rivers, not Emond's Field. As he made his way down the green, people called to him, some from the ruins of their homes, asking if they could help. He heard them only as murmurs in the background, even when they walked alongside him for a distance as they spoke. Without really thinking about it, he managed words that said he needed no help, that everything was being taken care of. When they left him, with worried looks and sometimes a comment about sending Nynaeve to him, he noticed that just as little. All he let himself be aware of was the purpose he had fixed in his head. Bran Alzir could do something to help Tam. What that could be, he tried not to dwell on. But the mayor would be able to do something, to think of something. The inn had almost completely escaped the destruction that had taken half the village. A few scorch marks marred its walls, but the red roof tiles glittered in the sunlight as brightly as ever. All that was left of the peddler's wagon, though, blackened iron wheel rims leaning against the charred wagon box, now on the ground. The big round hoops that had held up the canvas cover slanted crazily, each at a different angle. Tom Maryland sat cross-legged on the old foundation stones, carefully snipping singed edges from the patches on his cloak with a pair of small scissors. He sat down cloaking without asking if Rand needed or wanted help. He hopped down and picked up the back of the litter. Inside? Of course. Don't you worry, boy. Your wisdom will take care of it. I've watched her work since last night. She has a deft touch and a sure skill. It could be a lot worse. One died last night. Not many, perhaps, but any at all are too many for me. Old Fane just disappeared. And that's the worst of all. Trolloc will eat anything. You thank the light your father is still here, and alive for the wisdom to heal. Rand blotted out the words, reducing the voice to meaningless sound that he noticed no more than a fly's buzzing. He could not bear any more sympathy, any more attempts to boost his spirits. Not now. Not until Bran Al'Vir told him how to help him. Suddenly he found himself facing something scrawled on the inn door. A curving line scratched with a charred stick. A charcoal teardrop balanced on its point. So much had happened that it hardly surprised him to find the Dragon's Fang marked on the door of the Winespring Inn. Why anyone would want to accuse the innkeeper or his family of evil, or bring the inn bad luck, was beyond him. But the night had convinced him of one thing. Anything was possible. Anything at all. At a push from the Gleeman, he lifted the latch and went in. The common room was empty except for Bran Al'Vir. And cold, too, for no one had found time to lay a fire. The mayor sat at one of the tables, dipping his pen in an inkwell with a frown of concentration on his face, and his gray-fringed head bent over a sheet of parchment. Nightshirt stuck hastily into his trousers. Bagging around his considerable weight, he absently scratched at one bare foot with the toes of the other. His feet were dirty, as if he had been outside more than once without bothering about boots, despite the cold. "What's your trouble?" he demanded without looking up. "Be quick here! I have 24 things to do right this minute, and more that should have been done an hour ago. So I have little time or patience. Well, out with it!" "Master Al'Vir," Rand said. "It's my father." The mayor's head jerked up. "Rand! Tam!" He threw down the pen and knocked over his chair as he leaped up. "Perhaps the light hasn't abandoned us altogether. I was afraid you were both dead." Bella galloped into the village an hour after the Trollocs left, lathered and blowing as if she'd run all the way from the farm. And I thought, no time for that now. We'll take him upstairs. He seized the rear of the litter, shouldering the Gleeman out of the way. "You go get the wisdom, Master Maryland, and tell her I said hurry, or I'll know the reason why. Rest easy, Tam. We'll soon have you in a good soft bed. Go, Gleeman, go!" Tom Maryland vanished through the doorway before Rand could speak. "Nynaeve wouldn't do anything. She said she couldn't help him. I knew. I hoped you'd think of something." Master Al'Vir looked at Tam more sharply, then shook his head. "We'll see, boy. We'll see." But he no longer sounded confident. "Let's get him into a bed. He can rest easy, at least." Rand let himself be prodded toward the stairs at the back of the common room. He tried hard to keep his certainty that somehow Tam would be all right. But it had been thin to begin with, he realized, and the sudden doubt in the mayor's voice shook him. On the second floor of the inn, at the front, were half a dozen snug, well-appointed rooms with windows overlooking the green. Mostly they were used by the peddlers, or people down from Watch Hill or up from Devon Ride. But the merchants who came each year were often surprised to find such comfortable rooms. 3 of them were taken now, and the mayor hurried Rand to one of the unused ones. Quickly the down comforter and blankets were stripped back on the wide bed, and Tam was transferred to the thick feather mattress with goose-down pillows tucked under his head. He made no sound beyond hoarse breathing as he was moved, not even a groan. The mayor brushed away Rand's concern, telling him to set a fire to take the chill off the room. While Rand dug wood and kindling from the wood box next to the fireplace, Rand drew back the curtains in the room, letting in the morning light, then began to gently wash Tam's face. By the time the Gleeman returned, the blaze on the hearth was warming the room. "She will not come," Tom Maryland announced as he stalked into the room. He glared at Rand, his bushy white brows drawing down sharply. You didn't tell me she had seen him already. She almost took my head off. I thought... I don't know. Maybe the mayor could do something. Could make her see... Hands clenched in anxious fists, Rand turned from the fireplace to Bran. Master Alvier, what can I do? The rotund man shook his head helplessly. He laid a freshly dampened cloth on Tam's forehead and avoided meeting Rand's eye. I can't just watch it die, Master Alvier. I have to do something. The gleeman shifted as if to speak. Rand rounded on him eagerly. Do you have an idea? I'll try anything. I was just wondering, Tom said, tamping his long-stemmed pipe with his thumb. The mayor knew who stole the dragon's fang on his door. He peered into the bowl, then looked at Tam and replaced the unlit pipe between his teeth and his side. Someone seems
I'm
not
tougher
to like
than
him
you thought,
anymore.
huh?
Or maybe it's his guests they don't like. Rand gave him a disgusted look and turned away to stare into the fire. His thoughts danced like the flames, and like the flames, they concentrated fixedly on one thing.
Hammer when you need one.
He would not give up. He could not just stand there and watch Tam die. My father, he thought fiercely. My father. Once the fever was gone, that could be cleared up as well. But the fever first. Only how? Bran Alvier's mouth tightened as he looked at Rand's back, and the glare he directed at the gleeman would have given a bear pause, but Tom just waited expectantly, as if he had not noticed it. It's probably the work of one of the Congers or a Coplin, the mayor said finally, though the light alone knows which. They're a large brood, and if there's ill to be said of someone, or even if there isn't, they'll say it. They make Sen Bui sound honey-tongued. That wagon load who came in just before dawn? The gleeman asked. They hadn't so much as smelled a Trolloc. And all they wanted to know was when festival was going to start, as if they couldn't see half the village in ashes. Master Alvier nodded grimly. One branch of the family, but none of them are very different. That fool Darl Coplin spent half the night demanding I put Mistress Moraine and the Master Lan out of the inn, out of the village, as if there would be any village at all left without them. Rand had only half listened to the conversation, but this last tugged him to speak. What did they do? Why, she called ball lightning out of the clear night sky, Master Alvier replied. Sent it darting straight at the Trollocs. You've seen trees shattered by it. The Trollocs stood it no better. Moraine? Rand said incredulously, and the mayor nodded. Mistress Moraine. And Master Lan was a whirlwind with that sword of his. His sword. The man himself is a weapon, and in 10 places at once, or so it seems. Burned me, but I still wouldn't believe it if I couldn't step outside and see. He rubbed a hand over his bald head. Winter night visits, just beginning, her hands full of presents and honey cakes, and her heads full of wine. Then the dogs snarling, and suddenly the two of them burst out of the inn, running through the village, shouting about Trollocs. I thought they'd had too much wine. After all, Trollocs? Then, before anyone knew what was happening, those things were right in the streets with us, slashing at people with their swords, torching houses, howling to freeze a man's blood. He made a sound of disgust in his throat. We just ran like chickens with a fox in the hen yard till Master Lan put some backbone into us. No need to be so hard, Tom said. You did as well as anyone could.
Now, if we
Not every
regulate the
Trolloc
weather,
lying out
we
there
might be
fell
able
to
to
the
control
fool
these
them.
nasty critters.
Yes, well,
You notice anything
Master Alvier
different?
gave himself a shake. It's still almost too much to believe. Aes Sedai and Emond Smith, and Master Lan as a warder. Aes Sedai? Rand said. She can't be. I talked to her. She doesn't. You think they wore signs? Said Riley. Aes Sedai painted across his back. Maybe danger, stay away. Suddenly he slapped his forehead. Aes Sedai. I'm an old fool and losing my wits. There's a chance, Rand. I can't tell you to do it, and I don't know if I have the nerve for me. Chance? Rand said. I'll take any chance if it'll help. Aes Sedai, real Rand. First me that, you've heard the stories. They can cure where medicines fail. Gleeman, you should remember that better than I. Gleeman's tales are full of Aes Sedai. Why didn't you speak up instead of letting me flail around? I'm a stranger here, Tom said, looking long at his pipe. And Goodman Coplin isn't the only one who wants nothing to do with Aes Sedai. Guess the idea came from you. Aes Sedai, Rand muttered, trying to make the woman who had smiled at him fit the stories. Help from an Aes Sedai was sometimes worse than no help at all, so the stories said, like poison in a pie. And their gifts always had a hook in them, like fish bait. Suddenly the coin in his pocket, the coin Moraine had given him, seemed like a burning coal. It was all he could do not to rip it out of his coat and throw it out the window. Nobody wants to get involved with Aes Sedai, lad, the mayor said slowly. It is the only chance I can see, but it's still no small decision. I cannot make it for you, but I have seen nothing but good from Mr. Moraine Sedai. Sometimes, he gave a meaningful look at Tam. You have to take a chance, even if it's a poor one. Some of the stories are exaggerated in a way, Tom added, as if the words were being dragged from him. Some of them. Besides, boy, what choice do you have? None, Rand sighed. Tam still had not moved a muscle. His eyes were sunken as if he had been sick a week. I'll go find her. The other side of the bridges, the Gleeman said, where they are disposing of the dead Trollocs. But be careful, boy. Aes Sedai do what they do for reasons of their own, and they aren't always the reasons others think. The last was a shout that followed Rand through the door. He had to hold on to the sword hilt to keep the scabbard from tangling in his leg with the rest, but he would not take the time to remove it. He clattered down the stairs and dashed out of the inn, tiredness forgotten for the moment. The chance for Tam, however small, was enough to overcome a night without sleep, for a time at least. That the chance came from an Aes Sedai, or what the price of it might be, he did not want to consider. And as for actually facing an Aes Sedai, he took a deep breath and tried to move faster. The bonfire stood well beyond the last houses to the north and the west side of the road to Watch Hill. The wind still carried the oily black columns of smoke away from the village, but even so, a sickly sweet stink filled the air, like a roast left hours too long on the spit. Rand gagged at the smell, then swallowed hard when he realized its source. A fine thing to do with Beltane fires. The men tending the fires had claws tied over their noses and mouths, but their grimaces made it plain that vinegar dampening the clogs was not enough. Even if it did kill the stench, they still knew the stench was there, and they still knew what they were doing. Two of the men were untying the harness straps of one of the big urins from a Trolloc's ankles. Lan, squatting beside the body, had tossed back the blanket enough to reveal the Trolloc's shoulders and goat-snouted head. As Rand trotted up, the warder unfastened a metal badge, blood-red enameled trident, and one spiked shoulder for Trolloc's shirt of black mail. Cobra, he announced. He bounced the badge on his palm and snatched it out of the air with a growl. That makes 7 bands so far. Moraine, seated cross-legged on the ground a short distance off, shook her head tiredly. A walking staff covered from end to end in carved vines and flowers lay across her knees, and her dress had the rumpled look of having been worn too long. 7 bands. 7. That many have not acted together since the Trolloc Wars. Bad news piles on bad news. I'm afraid, Lan. I thought we had gained a march, but we may be further behind than ever. Rand stared at her, unable to speak. Aes Sedai. He'd been trying to convince himself that she would not look any different now that he knew who... what? Was going to. To his surprise, she did not. She was no longer quite so pristine, with wisps of her hair sticking out in all directions, and a faint streak of soot across her nose, yet not really different either. Surely there must be something about an Aes Sedai to mark her for what she was. On the other hand, if outward appearance reflected what was inside, and if the stories were true, then she should look closer to a Trolloc than to a more than handsome woman whose dignity was not dented by sitting in the dirt. And she could help Tam. Whatever the cost, there was that before anything else. He took a deep breath. Mistress Moraine. Moraine Sedai. Both turned to look at him, and he froze under her gaze. Not the calm, smiling gaze he remembered from the Green. Her face was tired, but her dark eyes were a hawk's eyes. Aes Sedai, breakers of the world, puppeteers who pulled strings and made thrones and nations dance in designs only the women from Tar Valon knew. A little more light in the darkness, the Aes Sedai murmured. She raised her voice. How are your dreams, Rand al'Thor? He stared at her. My dreams? nut like that can give a man bad dreams, Rand. If you have nightmares, you must tell me of it. I can help with bad dreams, sometimes. There's nothing wrong with my... It's my father. He's hurt. It's not much more than a scratch, but the fever is burning him up. The wisdom won't help. She says she can't. But the stories...